Today's program is devoted to the Colorado Music Festival. And this is an orchestra that's been in residence at Chautauqua for 42 years and is considered a gleaming star in the cultural universe that thrives in our beloved city. We have two presenters today who will focus their attention on the marvelous magical work that was performed last evening and which will be repeated tonight, Scheherazade by Rimsky-Korsakov. First, Stephen Trainor. He serves as board president of CMF and the Center for Musical Arts. He's originally from the UK and has lived in Boulder since 2007. His distinguished career included working for Decca Records and subsequently the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden. He also spent a number of years working in theatrical stage automation, designing and installing systems in opera houses around the world, including the Lyric Opera in Chicago and the Royal Opera House and Covent Garden in London. He is now the founding CEO of a software publishing company specializing in planning tools for outdoor photographers. In his spare time, he enjoys playing both clarinet and the piano. Our second guest is the brilliant virtuoso violinist Calin Lupanu, a native of Romania. He is in his 15th year as concertmaster of the Colorado Music Festival Symphony Orchestra. He also serves as coordinator for the many chamber music concerts that CMF offers throughout the summer. When not in residence here, Calin serves as concertmaster of the Charlotte Symphony, which is quite a substantial organization in Charlotte, North Carolina. If I were to list even a fraction of his many accomplishments as a performer, I would rob you of what I'm sure you will experience is a most enjoyable program today. Please welcome Stephen Trainor and Calin Lupanu.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and speak to you today. I brought a book that's been on my shelves for 25 years, I think, Tales from the Thousand and One Nights, which is the inspiration for this work, Scheherazade, which is being performed tonight by the festival. So let me just get I'm going to have my slides here as well, in case I can't quite read from this angle. So. Yeah, the Colorado Music Festival, wonderful institution, fantastic orchestra, and it really does specialize in playing, I think, some of the biggest, grandest works in the repertoire, of which Scheherazade is an excellent example. So what we'd like to do today is take a little bit of time. I'm going to take a note of the time, make sure I don't overrun, to try to explain a little bit about some of the themes in the work and some of the techniques that Rimsky-Korsakov uses to evoke this exotic, oriental atmosphere that is so brilliantly depicted in the piece. The whole theme of Orientalism, I guess, I need to do this twice. There we go. In music, it's pretty it's a common thing. There are a lot of works, many of which I'm sure you'll have heard, that include elements of Orientalism. That is to say, works primarily by Western composers looking at the East, not necessarily with first-hand experience of being there themselves or knowing the culture themselves, and developing artistic musical works around that. Scheherazade is an excellent example of that, but others would include Puccini's operas, Madame Butterfly, Turandot, that you might know. Strauss' Frauen Schatten is one of his less-known operas, but it has Oriental elements. But probably the best known of all is Scheherazade. It was a well-known subject. There's paintings, there's poems, there's the tales, there's translations. So this was something that was very much milling around in the late 19th century. This painting here is painted in 1880, which is before, sorry, this painting here, in 1880, before Rimsky-Korsakov had composed his piece. The work in question, so Rimsky-Korsakov, Russian composer, born 1844. I need to get into the habit of doing this twice. Died in 1908. Part of a group of, well known as a group of 5 composers in Russia at the time who had an interest in programmatic works, in Oriental works. And he had served in the Russian Navy, so in the military, and he'd spent time at sea. And so he was really quite fascinated. He'd seen parts of the world. He'd traveled widely, which wasn't something that many people had the opportunity to do back then, of course. And he really sought to fuse these interests of travel and the sea and the Orient into Scheherazade. The work, he started composing it in the winter of 1887, so that's 7 years after that painting that we saw just before. Completed it the following summer in 1888, and it premiered that fall in October in St. Petersburg, where he conducted it. And this was something that he wrote just to set the scene of how the piece works. Basically, the background to this is that a sultan, Shahryar, has, I'll read it, convinced that all women are false and faithless, vowed to put to death each of his wives after the first nuptial night. But the Sultana Scheherazade saved her life by entertaining her lord with fascinating tales, told seriatim, which is a term that basically means in strict sequence, as best I understand it, for 1,001 nights. The Sultan, consumed with curiosity, postponed from day to day the execution of his wife and finally repudiated his bloody vow entirely. So, happy ending after a lot of work and a lot of storytelling. Some of you may have record collections at home, and if your record collection is anything like mine, it includes many very fine examples of truly dreadful covers from the 1960s and 70s. I thought I'd share a selection with you because I think they're interesting in showing how people view the work. Here's the first one. He looks a bit bored, is my take on this, but there he is waiting to be regaled with fascinating tales. I imagine he's saying this better get interesting soon or bad things will happen. She looks bored in this one. I thought I was the one who got to do all the talking. Maybe not. But I thought it was about the storytelling. This is another theme that emerges in record covers of Scheherazade. I'm not sure they quite wanted to commit to the literary and storytelling narrative aspects of this tale here. And another one. That's a special photo, I think you'll agree. This is a film, I don't know what the film is, but it's not a record cover, never mind. Yes, I don't know quite what, well, I do know what this reference is, we'll come back to it shortly, but it's a different take. So, some amusing covers, I think, for Scheherazade. I won't say any more about that. Anybody have any idea what these dates may signify? They're all related to Scheherazade. Any ideas? No? I'll show you. Ice skating. So if you're thinking, I'm not sure I've heard this piece before, you almost certainly have heard this piece before. It's very popular. And I think that some of the qualities of the themes that you'll hear Calin play for us today, you'll hear how well they lend themselves to visual depictions, to movement, to dance. And the work was adapted into a ballet in 1910, which was noted for its daring depictions of exotic activities on stage. And so it's had a very long and successful run in a lot of different situations, in visual arts, in literature, in music, and dance. So let's jump into the piece. It's structured in four. Actually, before we do that, I wanted to read. You'll see that the first movement has been subtitled "The Sea and Sinbad's Ship," and Rimsky-Korsakov didn't initially put these titles on the movements himself. He was convinced to do so by some of his composer colleagues as a way to try to draw the audience in to understand what they were hearing. But why perhaps the sea is, and why these tales really attracted him. A couple of little quotes that I found here. This is from Sinbad the Sailor and Sinbad the Porter. Just a couple of paragraphs. In those distant seas, I once saw a fish 200 cubits in length, and another with a head that resembled an owl's. This I saw with my own eyes, and many other things no less strange and wondrous. When you think of Rimsky-Korsakov being at sea himself and some of the things he would have seen, you can get a sense of why this material would have attracted him. This one from, let's have a look. The Fourth Voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. The jovial and extravagant life which I led after my return did not cause me to forget the delights and benefits of travel in distant lands, and my thirst for seeing the world, despite the perils I had encountered, continued as violent as ever. My restless soul at length yielded to the call of the sea, and, after making preparations for a long voyage, I set sail with the merchandise from Basra, together with some eminent merchants of that city. So this theme of travel, of exploration, of new places, it's very much tied up with Rimsky-Korsakov's own experiences and interests. So this first movement, the sea and Sinbad's ship, I won't go through too much detail of the description here, but let's go here. So we're going to look at a few musical examples, and I'm aware that not everybody may read music, but think of it as it's very similar to reading a topographic map. It's contours. You see that as the notes on the stave are further towards the top of the page, higher in pitch, lower, lower. Forgive me if that is patronizing, but I know some people won't read music. But I think you can just visually get a very good sense from some of these score examples of the techniques that Rimsky-Korsakov is using. So this is the opening of the piece, and it's a very declamatory theme. This is the Sultan's theme. Think back to that wonderful, the first record cover where he's looking rather sullen and bored and crossed-armed. So Calin is going to play it for us. Pretty serious stuff. And if you look at the orchestration here, you can see down the left side, this is played by the clarinets, the bassoons, the horns jump in for the opening chord, the trombones and the tuba, plus all of the strings. And it's played in unison, which means everybody's playing basically the same pitch. So it's very much sort of a rhetorical declamation, opening statement, followed by a big pause. And after a little interlude, which is, I imagine, please, let's hope the Sultan will cheer up, and then Scheherazade comes in. Now, Scheherazade is depicted by the violin, so this is a big piece for Calin. There are lots of wonderful moments, and it's an example, I think, of where the violin is used to depict a female character in music. It's one of the best known. Others might be like Heldenleben by Strauss, where the solo violin depicts his wife, for example. So let's hear this theme.
May I add a couple things?
Of course you can.
In the first theme that you just heard, what is very interesting, and I'm going to try to make a difference, the fact that the theme goes down. So it's yeah, so it's a descending by a whole step, and then I'm very grateful, extremely grateful to all these composers that have picked beautiful women and the violin to describe my parts. Scheherazade is one of them. As Stephen mentioned, in Ein Heldenleben, it's Strauss's wife. Then we have a famous solo song. We just played it a few years ago. And then, of course, famous Don Quixote, also by Strauss, portraying Don Quixote's love interest. Going back to Scheherazade, this is her theme.
So let me just advance the slide there. You can see just what you heard, the meandering quality of that theme and the way it's written, the varying rhythms, the slowing and speeding up. It's very much drawing you in to the piece. Can you hear me still? Yeah, cool. So we've set the opening scene, we've got the Sultan's theme, we have Shahrazad's theme, and then we get into the tales. And basically what happens here, there's a lot of material that is adapted throughout this piece, and you'll hear the same themes coming back from time to time, or coming back slightly changed, evolved, if you will. And this next violin solo, which Calin will play for us, you'll hear how it's derived from that opening statement for the Shahrazad theme. Thank you. So, one thing I wanted to point out in that, you obviously we're hearing just the violin today, but there's not that much missing from what you will hear tonight. If you look at the score, you'll see that there's a little line in the cellos, pizzicato, and the solo line. That's the bassoon has a sustained note, and the clarinet does the occasional echo. So it's very transparent, simple scoring, but very evocative nonetheless. As the movement continues, one of the ways that Rimsky-Korsakov really gives this piece so much color is he draws in different instruments of the orchestra. So you'll hear solos for the oboe, the clarinet, the cello. You can see here on the top line of the score there is the oboe solo coming in. There's a little clarinet sort of obligato line here in the background. And on the next slide, we have the flute. And then we're back to some more violin solo. Let's jump back to the slides. And then after this solo material, you get more of a sort of tutti section with the full orchestra playing, and maybe Calin, if you wouldn't mind playing that line there. So one of the things that this is doing, thank you, Calin, you hear how sort of colorful and twisty that sounds, and it's an aspect of chromaticism, which is really, if you play chromatic scale on an instrument, you're playing each semitone, each half step in sequence. And embedded in a few different ways in this theme is this chromatic aspect, which gives it this sort of exotic quality. So if you look here in the, I'll point out here. Just here, you have da 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 da. That's a twisty bit, but also that's the small twist. There's a bigger arc in terms of the descending semitones, which is sort of a variant on what we heard in the opening theme. Calin, I don't know if you might be able to just give us a sort of the C, B flat, A. So this technique is used throughout this piece. Not consistently, but it recurs in a lot of different places. So chromaticism is one of the key tricks in this piece. Second movement, the Calendar Prince. The Calendar is a rich prince who gets shipwrecked by a magnet mountain. So there's another nautical theme to this. Let's. Who recognizes this? Anybody know what this is from? Princess Bride, you must have seen The Princess Bride, surely. Oh, sorry, that. Yes, you probably all recognize that. And the reason I show that is because what he does here is he draws us out of the story back to a moment to focus on Scheherazade as the narrator. Here's the example. Thank you. So you can hear there how he's evolving the material. It develops, it becomes more complex. The rhythms are varied. There's some more richer harmony in there. And at the end of it, what we just heard, I think it's very cinematic. So you've been drawn out. You'll know the narrator is speaking, and then all of a sudden we cut back into the story. So it's like a cut shot and a scene change in a film, if you will. And the harp, which is sort of strumming away in the background during the solo, gives us the downbeat of this new faster section here. I'm using my mouse, and of course you can't see my mouse, but here. As we move back into the next story, if you will. So one of the other tricks that I wanted to point out was the way Rimsky-Korsakov uses rhythm to establish tension and to wrong foot the listener at times. This is a good example. Maybe, Calin, if you could play that for us. Thank you. And what you don't quite hear there, because we don't have the rest of the orchestra playing, is the way this melody is sort of placed on the offbeat. It's not like a waltz or a downbeat. 1 2 3 1 2 3. It's 1 2 3 1 2 3 1, and you go for a few bars before you get back onto the meter you expect. So he uses this to it slightly unsettles the listener, makes them sit up, pay attention, draws you in a little bit more, and you know that something interesting is going on. This is another example of sort of use of rhythm to build tension and release in the music. Calin, you could maybe play just 4 before the pause would be great. Yes, and then we're off again. So there's rhythmically, this is very similar to the opening Scheherazade theme, but the notes are derived from the theme of this tale, if you will, which we heard before. So he's weaving this material together. He's stretching it. He's releasing it. It's simple but highly effective. This is the next page where off we go again, back at tempo. A few more voices come in, so we have trombones and horns that come in with solos. The opening material at the top here that's a slightly varied version of the Sultan's theme from the opening, and then the trombone comes in with some new material again. It's a new voice, you haven't heard it solo before, so it's a new color that gets added to the mix. As things go on and we have sort of more dramatic material, you see some of this call and response type material. And then, so we hear that let me put my glasses on so I can read this. I still can't read it because my eyes are so shut. Trombones, and then the trumpets come back to echo it. So you get this call and response pattern. And then he also does some more rhythmic tricks on the second line. You can sort of see that he plays the material, but then it's played again, but not when you'd expect it to come. I don't know if that's something you might be able to give us a hint.
There is a way to divide the beat. You can divide it by 2, or you can divide it by 3. On the upbeat there, Stephen can help me point, is divided by 2. Then you have it divided by 3. It's very difficult technically to make the difference. Give you a little bit of a kick.
Let's cut back to the slides. There we go. So then the third movement is a slower, more gentle movement at its opening. And I think one of the things that's interesting when you look at this, and we'll hear the tune. Why don't we hear the tune, then I'll point a couple of things out. Thank you. So, a couple of things to think about there, that is very much different from some of the elements we've heard before. One is that he doesn't mess around rhythmically. Everything sort of lands on the beat when you'd expect. And also, it's not a very, there's a little section at the end that's a bit chromatic, but broadly, there's not a lot of chromaticism going on. So this gives you, the listener, I think, sort of sense of, they can relax, it's a bit more contented, it's peaceful sense. And he does it with very, very simple techniques, with, you know, simple chords underneath this very pretty melody. So he's not looking to surprise the listener at this point. This is a very much a change of mood. Of course, things get more dramatic again, and as it gets more lively, he starts introducing more percussion. That's another one of the things that he uses in the instrumentation to add the color. You can see in this line here, this is the tambourine. If you get to see the performance tonight, or maybe you saw it last night, you'll see Jerry Scholl working very hard with his extremely precise tambourine playing. The tambourine, I always think, it seems to be an instrument that you don't necessarily think requires a lot of technique. I'm not sure that's actually true. When you see somebody playing these parts, they need to be done very precisely. Did you?
Yeah, I can play that. So they're gonna do it on.
Yeah. Good. So then there is a big violin solo in this movement, and one of the things it starts introducing some different textures. So that's another one of the tricks in the book to provide the interest in this piece, is different instrumental textures between the tambourine type sound, the more percussive sound, the stabbing brass chords versus the lyrical melodies, and then this broken chord type motif, which Calin will play for us.
Yeah, and something in general about this solo, what is difficult for a performer is that the theme tends to come the same way, the very little differences. So we have to keep the Sultan's interest through the story, and my idea is to try to make it different every time. So it doesn't sound absolutely the same. In this particular solo, he also adds, it's the most extended solo. It's very difficult because it adds certain techniques that come all the way back from Paganini. You all know that we play the bow on the string, which is called détaché, or you play the bow off the string very fast, it's called staccato, which comes later in the piece. But also Paganini thought, oh, how about if we do the same thing slurred? So in one, we play many notes on one bow. So stuff like this. So the bow jumps while you play several notes, which is very difficult to do, and Paganini in this first caprice. There are several other caprices that have the same technique. Now, in this particular solo, we have, after the Scheherazade theme, you have that particular technique. And then the oboes come in with the theme from the beginning.
Wonderful. So it's almost like you hear a number of soloists in mini concertos in this piece. There are some really wonderful solos, particularly for violin, but the trombone, the clarinet, the bassoon. We're almost done. This is the last movement. The sea, the ship gets dashed against the rocks, so it's lots of dramatic storm type material. And it starts with another restatement of that opening theme, so that the Sultan's theme. And we hear back from Scheherazade as well, so why don't we hear that solo? And as the movement progresses, I thought this was an interesting example from the score. Visually, you can sort of see that this is putting together a lot of those tricks that we've talked about in the piece. We've got the chromatic scales and the winds, or somewhat chromatic scales. We've got the glissandi coming down. We've got this broken chord motif in the violins. You've got the percussion going, so you have the cymbals and timpani rolling, etc. So everything's coming together for the finale here. And then at the end of it all, we go back to the narrator for a final violin solo.
And what I like to do here is basically every single time the Scheherazade theme comes, it starts with this kind of soft. It's never with an accent. This time he writes an accent on it, and I'm thinking just maybe Scheherazade is a little, she had enough of storytelling, so she's not that good. So I try to come in a little more, a little stronger.
Wonderful. And Calin gets to basically finish the whole piece for us, so I think we should hear that.
Well, let me just say, my wife and I went to that concert last night. It was sensational. And to thank Stephen and Calin so much for your presentation today. We are donating 100 doses of polio vaccine in each of your names to help eradicate polio worldwide. Thank you again.
Thank you.